You, in 2020, endorsed a socialist for president. Are you a socialist?
No, I'm not. I call myself a progressive capitalist, but I don't think Bernie is a socialist either. I think Bernie is more a social democrat, but he's obviously affiliated. I view him as a Scandinavian in the Scandinavian model.
Well, that's a democratic socialist. What about the label socialist do you feel like presents a break with what your personal ideology is? Why aren't you a socialist?
That's a great question. I don't think I don't think the government should run Apple computers or ExxonMobil station. I mean, I don't think the government should own the means of production in an economy.
Should the workers of Apple Computer run Apple computers?
I think the workers should be represented on corporate boards. I think the workers should have more protections and more of a say. But I don't believe that there has to be always collective ownership of all of the means of production, because I think that doesn't allow for people to go out and invent new things and defy collective judgment. So I come out where sort of Amartya Sen is, which was an economist, progressive economist, and he says, look, markets are necessary in his view, but we need to have markets well regulated, and we have to have fundamental investments in education and healthcare so everyone has a chance to do it.
But the markets, in your mind, the markets still have to be determinant here. They still have to be at the core of what's driving the major economic decisions.
Well, anytime you have a transaction, that's a market, right? So the question is, do we have rigged markets where there's been rent-seeking behavior? Yes, where people have tried, but where you haven't had fairness. So the workers have been exploited. Financial industries have exploited the system, as we just saw recently with the GameStop. But I don't think that. But I do believe in markets that are well functioning and well functioning, well regulated, free enterprise with investment in people having the right to education. Healthcare is probably where I come out.
I mean, there is a concept of market socialism. I don't think that anyone, seriously believing in the idea of a socialized economy or planned economy is categorically opposed to the use of markets to do certain things like set prices and manage supply and demand, things of that nature. But you mentioned rent seeking, which in my mind adheres to the capitalist system. So what is the non-rent seeking aspect of market capitalism?
Well, production. I mean, you have people who are making things and inventing things and creating value. I mean, I don't think every economic activity is just trying to compete for your share of the pie. I think there are a lot of people who are entrepreneurs or business leaders who are doing things that are adding value. As simple as writing a book or producing a movie or producing a podcast or producing a car. I mean, I think that there's a lot of productive activity. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of non-productive activity where people may be just trying to take the pie and get their share of it. And that's what I would describe as rent seeking. Of course, not my theory. I mean, there are economists who've written about that.
But isn't it that rent seeking, that profit motive, precisely what is supposed to create value in a capitalist system?
No, I think what's supposed to create value is I don't have a problem with the profit motive. If someone writes a brilliant book, or someone writes a brilliant, if Lin-Manuel Miranda makes Hamilton and wants to make millions of dollars, I have no problem with that. But
I'm a communist now. You brought Hamilton in it, and it just made me go full commie. Just kidding.
Yeah. So but I don't have a problem with it was why I thought the attacks on Bernie Sanders. Oh, you made millions of dollars on your books. I had no problem with that. I mean, I thought it was ridiculous. So I don't have a problem with productive value adding. And then the question becomes, well, how do you distinguish between what is productive value adding and what is rent seeking? And obviously there's a level of judgment, but I think most Americans would agree that there's a lot of activity in our economy right now that isn't productive value added or that is exploitive of working and middle class Americans. And that's what needs to be fixed.
From now on, that is the Hamilton defense of capitalism.
I'm sure Lin-Manuel Miranda probably I don't know his politics on these things.
Well, we're gonna have to get him on the show and
exactly.
ask him the same questions and watch him
to defend progressive capitalism.
Yeah, watch him say no, I'm a Maoist. This guy doesn't speak for me. Moving on to another line of questioning. I caught an interview that you did a couple of years ago, I think it was 2019, where you were asked, should billionaires exist? This is a question that was asked of the Democratic presidential candidates, and you said yes.
Yes.
And since then, over the course of this pandemic, going on a year now, and the economic collapse, we're in a time where, in real terms, unemployment is approximately where it was at the height of the late 2000s, early 2010s recession. And during this period of widespread privation, Jeff Bezos, for instance, has increased his wealth by a multiple, as have many other billionaires. So I want to ask you again, has that changed your mind? Do you still believe billionaires should exist?
I don't think the government should outlaw billionaires. I think we should have a significant wealth tax. I mean, I think, the great thing with the United States, they're developing countries where you have to choose between innovation, wealth creation, and equity. They don't have enough resources to be able to provide everyone with food, water, basic healthcare, and education. The amazing thing with the United States is we can do both. We can actually have extraordinary wealth generation, wealth creation, and provide everyone with food, provide everyone with basic education and healthcare. We just choose not to. So what I would say is I have no problem personally. I mean, I know others have a disagreement with someone having an aspiration of becoming a billionaire, but then I would have a wealth tax on that billions, and I'd use that money to pay for everyone having education, healthcare, basic housing.
It feels good to say, it feels right to say, okay, there's no trade-off between people being able to have enormous aggregation of wealth and become billionaires and providing for people if you just tax them. But one of the concerns of the founding fathers, one of the concerns of folks is that if people are that affluent, that they can have an impact on our democracy, that we have an oligarchy, that we have people like Michael Bloomberg who can enter a presidential race and get on the board just because he has enough wealth to spend as much as everybody else out of his own pocket, as much as everybody else has earned. And there's a relationship, right, between the growing number of billionaires and growing income inequality. The number of billionaires grew more than ninefold between 1990 and March of 2020. And we all know, as Virgil mentioned, that the wealth of those billionaires has grown even more in the course of the COVID pandemic. So do you think there's a relationship between income inequality and the existence of billionaires?
I think if the point is, do I think that there's a relationship between billionaires, income inequality, and political inequality? I would say yes. I mean, if the point is that having these billionaires gives them disproportionate voice in our democracy, and that's unhealthy for our democracy, and makes it harder to have progressive policy, I think that's undoubtedly true. And I guess what I would say is that's why we need to ban having this kind of money, unlimited money in politics, and why I've proposed democracy dollars, which is make every voter give everyone $50 to spend on political campaigns.
Like a candidate-style system.
Public financing, but actually constitutional under this court. So I think there are ways to limit that influence. But right now, you do have that influence. Now, I think where my view falls short, candidly, where my defense of billionaires and maybe 100 years when historians judge this and say, what Khanna was talking about, you could tax billionaires on a wealth tax and you can help build America, is the fact that 2 billion people around the world live on less than $1 a day, and probably all of us will be judged somewhat harshly in terms of the inequality on a global scale.
Does addressing inequality mean, and let's just, for simplification reasons, let's just think about this domestically, does addressing inequality necessarily mean wealth redistribution?
Well, we definitely need, we need a higher tax on the rich. I mean, we need to put that money into education, and we need to put that money into healthcare. I don't think that deficits matter to the extent that the consensus was, but you can't just have unlimited printing of money without eventually having inflation. So I think the revenue has to come from somewhere, and that revenue ought to come, in my view, from a wealth tax and higher taxes on the wealthy.
Why aren't we talking more about the wealth tax in conjunction with this argument that's ongoing about student debt relief? Because Joe Biden at his town hall pit the idea of canceling student debt against another priority. I think it was funding early childhood education or something like that. Something about the kids. Won't somebody think of the children, right? And obviously those things aren't in conflict. And if, just like with the stimulus checks, just like with anything, if the issue is that you're giving money to the wrong people, then obviously you can get it back via progressive taxation. If you don't want some affluent attorney getting bailed out with their student debt, if they're affluent, tax them back on the back end. Why is it that we're not talking more about the ability to use a wealth tax to create the kind of equality that people want, and instead we're knee deep in these austerity conversations in the middle of a economic crisis?
I think the Democrats have, especially if President Biden's generation grew up in a time of politics where they remember Walter Mondale's speech saying, "I'm going to raise your taxes," and he is going to as well on Reagan. But I'm telling you the truth, and Mondale's numbers tanked. And I think they've grown up in a time where they saw Bush beat Dukakis badly by pitting him as a tax and spend liberal. And they don't recognize, in my view, that the political climate has changed dramatically from that talking about taxing the rich is not a political liability, and that you can differentiate taxing the rich from a tax on the working or middle class. But I think that generational paranoia with being labeled someone who's going to increase taxes and the success, frankly, of the Republican propaganda machine is what makes people hesitant to do that.